Hello there, and welcome to Tales of the Force, a place for fans to tell their Star Wars stories. Joining me today is our first guest on our second episode. It is Andrés Alvarez. He is 32 years old and has been a Star Wars fan for so long, he doesn't even remember when he first started loving it. The prequels were his first in-theater Star Wars experience, and that love has even evolved into a Star Wars and politics podcast that he produces called Sithty Minutes. His favorite era is now the High Republic, and his favorite movie is The Last Jedi. Don't forget, this is André's personal story. It is not my place on the show to diminish, dismiss, judge, or even have an opinion on his story. Any views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are his own. Any comments on this episode and story are expected to be respectful. General reminder, Star Wars is a story that deals with hopeful themes, but it also does touch on some darker things like war, death, loss, slavery and oppression, trauma, mental health issues, personal injury, abandonment, pregnancy, and childbirth. You are advised to refrain from watching or listening to this YouTube channel or podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. As always, please take care of yourself and reach out to someone you trust if needed. In this episode, we also do discuss some other things that I will warn you about up front in case it is also something that is not best for you to listen to or watch. And that has to do with André's personal story of the loss of his father to cancer. And also, we do touch a little bit on depression. So if those things might be triggering for you, it might be best to skip this episode and listen to the next one. With all of that out of the way, please join me in welcoming our first guest here on Tales of the Force. Hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for inviting me and being the first guest.
Yes. I know we kind of said off of being recording, but like it's kind of funny how, I have this like intention for what I want this podcast to be, and I'm like, I don't want it to be political, and then I love that my first guest actually has a political Star Wars podcast.
Yeah, Force works in mysterious ways. It's
Yes.
the living force came out and was like, here's a nudge.
And I think one of the things that I found so interesting, which I think, I don't know, it was kind of confirmation for me in a little bit that like this is going in the right direction and it is accomplishing what I'm accomplishing, is that like when you, like I had a time we're kind of going over like what your story is and things like that. Like that wasn't even something that I was focusing on, if that makes sense. Like, what some of your favorite things are or within Star Wars or, what your podcast was on. Like your story is what really spoke to me more than that. And I think that kind of shows a little bit too that like we can have like a different favorite movies and we can have like podcasts obviously about different things, but like at the heart of it is our love for Star Wars and also like just who we are as people. And I think that the fact that that wasn't even like something that I was really even focusing on when I was like, oh, like he has all this stuff ready, like he wants to come on, like that wasn't even my like main thought was those things. It was more like your story in the fandom was more important. So to me, that was just like a cool moment, I guess.
Yeah, serendipity.
Well, I guess we can just get into it. What is your Star Wars story? So, how did you come into the fandom? How has it, kind of gone through your life as you have grown up with it and that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. So my Star Wars story starts in Venezuela. So I was born and raised over there, and I can't remember the first time I saw Star Wars. I just remember that by the time I moved to the United States at like 4 or 5 years old, I was already a fan. Like I already knew lines. I already kind of knew the general plot points of like Luke is Vader's son, and there's an Emperor and the Force and all these other things in it. But I knew that I was like this was going to become a thing for me when my mom started dating my future stepfather. He had the original trilogy special edition on VHS. It was like the package set that had like Vader and Yoda on one side, and um, he also had a giant screen TV, which this was back in the day, right, when they were like tube TVs. So it was like it took time and energy, and those things were super heavy. So you
Yes.
had to make a plan to like have an entertainment center back then, and he had one, like surround sound Sony system, 70-inch TV kind of thing. And I remember thinking when I first went to his house of he let me hook up my Nintendo 64 and I could play Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer. And that was my first time seeing it on like a big screen. And I was just like, oh, this is going to be my thing because like now I can watch it just on a bigger screen at home or play these games on a bigger screen with like a giant surround sound system and whatnot and like really immerse myself at a time when that was hard. And I was an immigrant. So like I was living in my mom and I were sharing a bedroom in my grandma's house because she had a spare bedroom at that point in time. So like literally going from a tiny little square box to just like getting to immerse myself in something, and that was just my fascination at the time. So once episode 1, 2, and 3 came out, my stepdad and I would go and see them on premiere night, and then some days he would like go to my middle school at the time and request to pull me out of class and they just tell me, oh yeah, it's just like a family thing, but your dad's picking you up. I was like, oh okay, and we'd get in the car and he's like, we're just gonna go to the movie theater. So I saw Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith a few times in theater, and like at least premiere night was guaranteed, and then like at some other point down the road, sooner or later we'd watch it. So that really like got me into the fandom, and then by the time Revenge of the Sith came out, I think I was either 12 or 13. Um, so the speech of the Emperor as he's making the actual empire and transitioning from republic to empire, and this is how liberty dies with thunderous applause, like those lines at the age that I was like about to enter high school debate at that point, which would just become another part of my life. I just saw that intersection in theaters, and it just hit me really hard. So from that point, like everything else in my life just kind of started being filtered through the Star Wars lens. And then I moved out to Colorado when the sequel trilogy was coming out. So my first time kind of making it on my own and not having family, down the street from me, was also the first time that a new Star Wars was coming out and Disney was bringing the franchise back. So it was probably one of the most comforting things during one of my most like uncomfortable and like growing pain years, that at least I had a Star Wars to look forward to at the end of the year or whenever the next film would come out.
Well, that's awesome. I remember, going to those movies too. Now, so the TV that your stepdad had, was it one of those ones that like projected, like you were saying, like it had the tubes at the bottom?
No, it was just like those really really thick ones.
Okay.
So yeah, it was just like super hard to move and stuff because like it was before plasmas or anything. So it was
Yes.
just like a really big hunkin' box
Yes.
that would just be somewhere.
Yes. And like getting rid of those things was like a whole nother adventure. I feel like my parents had like a someone gave them at some point. It was like one of those old projector TVs. And
Oh,
so it also had to like took a while to turn on, and it had this like whole thing that like opened up at the bottom, I guess, or something. I don't know.
oh,
So I didn't
wow.
know if it was like something like that or not. But
No, probably just a step below though, because
yeah.
my dad was he was a nerd about certain things, and he would spend all the money he needed to get as good of an experience. So,
Yes, that's awesome. So, did you first start watching Star Wars like here in the States?
um, if I did, it would have been when I visited family. Like we would sometimes come for Christmas, because most of my family on my mom's side was already living in Florida before we emigrated. Um, but we did have access to a bunch of different channels out in Venezuela, because my mom, she worked for a architectural firm that held OPEC contracts. So they were making oil rigs in Venezuela, which is an OPEC country for those who don't know.
Mhm.
So we were kind of in the well-to-do, well-off class in Venezuela. So I do remember having access to like I could see monster truck races if I wanted to in the U.S. At whatever time they played, because it would just be a channel on our TV. So I just can't remember the first time I saw it. I just know that already by the time I was 5, it was like that was a way to my heart, or you could
Yeah.
capture my attention that way. So yeah, very hazy, but it must have been at some point being, I don't know, somewhere in the 2 to 3 range, like
Yeah.
young enough that I don't have a memory, but old enough that like it imprinted on me, and I was just already gravitating towards it.
I think it was kind of the same for me too. Like I don't really remember a time that I didn't watch it. And I think I have the same VHS set that you're talking about from
Yeah.
when I was growing up, like literally over here in my
Yeah.
room. Because when my parents like moved to where I live now, they were going through things. I was like, do not get rid of like certain things. So I was like, we have to save this.
Yeah. That's an investment. I wish I had it now. I don't even remember what happened to it in our, like, at some point in the VHS to DVD transition. I'm sure we just moved it over and it just got lost to the sands of time. But yeah, I think about that VHS set every now and then, because I was like, I had it. I had it. I owned it and I took
Yes.
care of it, because I already loved the series enough that I was like, I'm going to want to watch this one day. So
Yes, for
wild.
sure. Did you, when you were, this is like kind of a random question, but as you were growing up from, immigrating from one country to another, um, did you identify more, or did Luke's story speak to you more from leaving like his home and like taking off on this, hard journey going somewhere else where, he didn't really know exactly what the future held?
Yeah, that's interesting. I definitely could see a bit of myself in that story. I think for me though, the piece, because when I emigrated as a kid, I at 5 years old, like you don't really have a choice. It's
Yeah.
just more of like a, hey, here's a life update for you, as opposed to what do you think about this decision. Um, and I almost like admired Luke, because having emigrated, and like again being kind of well off in Venezuela, like learning from my mother the life we had as I was growing up in the United States, of like we had a house that was paid off, like she had the newest model year car and paid for it in cash, and we had another property that was like in the capital, because sometimes she needed to be there for like policy reasons, or whatever else was going on in the country, as well as we had a home in my childhood town that I grew up in, because like that was an important place for her, to then like living in my grandma's spare bedroom, until we could get our feet under us. I think I just admired Luke's courage growing up, um, that he he had a home, he had a life, right? His biggest concern at the start of A New Hope is that he wants to get some power converters. Like that is his concern. Um, and hoping that the droids will finally mean he doesn't have to work on the farm as much. And then he is opting into this great adventure. And meanwhile, there I was as a kid of like, all right, Luke, like, yeah, you want to go do something else, but it comes at a sacrifice and it comes at a cost. And like, I appreciated that he didn't necessarily understand all of what that meant, but was still willing to go on it, right? Like his thrill for adventure was overriding any kind of concern about like what would it actually mean to join the Imperial Academy? What would it actually mean to like not work on the farm and not be near my family anymore? Um, and and then when the Empire comes around and destroys the homestead, then like Luke really doubles down, right? He could go on this vendetta and decide like, he could have gone like the Boba Fett route in Book of Boba and just been like, I'm gonna rule Tatooine because this can never happen again, and just still kept in his sphere of influence. And instead he looked at Ben and said like, okay, show me the galaxy, like there's nothing here and I just have to move forward. And I admired that courage as a kid of just knowing the hardship that comes with a new journey on that scale. And Luke took it in such stride. He wanted it at first, and then when push became shove, like he accepted that that's what needed to happen, and just like moved on with it. So yeah, I really appreciate that. But I think for me, the sequel trilogy
Yeah.
really shines for me
Yeah.
because um as a kid, I viewed myself more as like a Ben, as a Ray,
Yeah.
as someone who like grew up in awe of other people and like the legends that they were hearing. Um, and then having to figure out what to do with that because even though I was a first generation immigrant, because I was so young at the time that I emigrated, I still had this upbringing of like my mother telling me this is how our like how hard it was to come over here and like the sacrifices I had to make for us to be in the United States and for you to get these opportunities. So I really aligned a lot more with Ben when I saw him on screen of just here's a guy who when he opens up, even the family scrapbook, right? Like Ben Solo could not have gone on a single vacation anywhere in the galaxy without some random person either being like, you're Han Solo and you owe me money, or you're Leia Organa and like, you saved my family, or like, if it wasn't for the rebellion, my planet would have been next on the Death Star's hit list or something like that. So like, you just grow up around that. And then, to say nothing of, oh, my grandma was Padme Amidala, like Queen of Naboo, who like fought and saved all of her people. And, my grandpa is both the hero of the Republic and the enforcer of the Empire. So like people loved him and hated him his entire life, depending on where like you were at that point in history. Um, so yeah, I align so much with the sequel trilogy characters because it really is like these were young adults, like I don't know, late teens, early 20s, something or other, before the galaxy was like, okay, make a choice and like you have to make your mark, and everyone expects greatness from all of these people because they are the descendant of so and so.
Right.
Yeah, like even Poe, if you go into the
Yeah.
comics, he's the kid of like two very great rebel pilots. So like you see that stress and that pressure of these are folks who are trying to live up to the hype of being a hero because their parents did it, and it's like they sacrificed so I could have a better world. So I need to like make the same heroic sacrifice to get to that space, and that's a hard thing to juggle, and like that's a very heavy mental load of like a pressure that these people put on themselves, right?
Right. Because it's not that necessarily like, which is not this way in all cases. Like in some cases, I think parents or grandparents or any kind of parental figure in someone's life can put a lot of pressure on people, obviously. Like, and then there's some times when that pressure doesn't necessarily come from them, but because of those circumstances, like put a lot of pressure on yourself. And sometimes it's a mixture of both, you know. And that's definitely a real world situation, you know, that like, you know, I actually hadn't really thought about that, you know, with Ben Solo, you know, like how he grew up with the pressure of who his family was, you know, and I mean, we see that with like Leia and Han's relationship, you know. I think a lot of that pressure and a lot of duty and um that sort of thing kind of broke them to an extent, you know. And like we
Right.
see that with Ben too, but like that's a really great point, you know. And I love that you you know, really identify and feel closer to the prequel characters, because I feel like a lot of times people will focus on the other movies and
Hmm.
kind of leave them out, you know, a little bit. And like I have said, and I've always said, like I genuinely love all of the movies. And so it always hurts my heart a little bit, you know, when, you know, people can like be really hateful on, you know, whether it's the sequels, sorry, is what I meant to say, the sequels, whether it's the sequels or the prequels, you know, like those I feel like are the movies right now that like get a lot of hate. Like the prequels are getting more love now, but like the sequels still, it's like a hard, you
Yeah.
know, a hard place. And so I love that the sequels, again, was what I meant to say earlier, are those characters, and that, you know, those are the movies that really have stuck with you. And I think that also goes to show that like Star Wars is more than just, you know, a Hollywood production, big blockbuster movie, you know,
Yeah.
like they go with us in parts of our life that like, you know, like you said, like transitioning then from Florida to moving to Colorado and kind of branching out on your own, that's when those came out. So, like, you can pinpoint a specific time in your life that certain Star Wars, you know, movie was there for you in a sense, you know. And I think that really speaks to the stories themselves and these characters, that like there's so much more to it than it just being a movie, you know. Like we all have these things that we go through in our life that, you know, maybe a show or one of the movies or one of the trilogies like can really speak to us. And I think that when we lose sight of that, like that really can like dehumanize someone, you know, that
Yeah.
might have something that's different, that might like something that's different within the fandom, you know, like you're discounting someone else's story. Like there's a reason normally why, and normally it's a really deep and personal reason why someone likes a character or likes a movie. And, you know, like I don't know, it kind of makes me sad when people do that, because I think about it on that level, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think like one of the big reasons that the sequel trilogy just even hit me so hard was I had I had lost my father to cancer while I was in college. So I can't remember. I want to say it was like my junior year. So I was like almost done with college. And because of where I went to college, I was too far away by the time that he passed to actually say goodbye. And you know, I sat there watching Force Awakens, and I went to the theater in Colorado and was just like, oh, it's a Star Wars, like it's a comfortable thing, it's a thing I know. I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna watch this movie, and I'm just so excited to see new Star Wars. And you know, the spoilers for Force Awakens, I suppose. You know, you get to the climax, and you know, there's the tension of, are they gonna get Ben back? And Han almost does it. They're on the bridge, and you know, Ben's very conflicted. The whole I know what I have to do, I just don't know if I have the strength to do it line. So like I'm sitting there, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm like, I already see so much of myself in you, because I can sense the struggle of like, you are descended from literally everyone in your family is some great something or other. and you're just trying to figure out what that means for you. But then he loses his dad, and like Ben's reaction, like, of course he does it, so I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh no, like he just mysteriously lost Han Solo. So like, yeah, he does it, but his face afterwards, like Adam Driver's acting, top notch. But his
I'm a
reaction,
huge Adam Driver fan, so
yeah, like it just he really nails it. But it's like his performance of Ben is so nuanced that even when you go back into Force Awakens, it's like he kills Han Solo, he watches him fall, and like his face is part shock, part like I'm tapping into another power. So like he is sensing that he's attuning himself more with the dark side in some sense, but like it's not joy, right? It's not relief. It's not like, okay, I'm at this next level of power and I can feel that I'm where I belong. It's like another layer of like confliction for him. Um, and then you go to Last Jedi, and when he's attacking the Raddus and blows up the command deck, he doesn't actually blow the command deck. Like he disables the ship and he's got everything lined up, and it shows him targeting. And Leia kind of like it's implied that she's kind of using the Force to start trying to reach out to him, and he doesn't hit the button, and someone else does it for him. So like I just saw so much of like that conflict within him, and as someone who like also lost his father, for me Last Jedi gave me a lot of stress when I first went in there, because I saw the trailers and I saw that he's going to like confront his mother, and I was like, I'm not, like, I personally am not that close to my maternal family, but I would never wish ill on family. And I was like, okay, here's the rub, right? Because Snoke wanted Ben to kill Han Solo to prove that like he was really willing to commit to the dark side, and he does it, but he's conflicted, and now he is getting up there in the ranks, and he's immediately faced with the choice of like, now can you kill your mother? And he just can't. Like there's still a part of him that won't go that dark. He's like, I know what it means to become a first order officer or become Darth Vader, but like Vader never killed his parents. He never had to confront that, and Ben doesn't want to make that sacrifice. So, like, just as I kept going through the film and through the films, like, Ben just kept growing on me. And then, even Rise of Skywalker, I was like almost a mess when he's on the second Death Star and you start hearing Han's voice, and it's like, could it have been Luke or something as a Force ghost or whatever? Maybe. Like, I have friends who are just like, but why Han? Because he can't become a Force ghost. And it's like, it doesn't need to be a Force ghost, right? Like Ben's a human too, and like there are voices that play inside his head. Like my dad and I, because he was so close to me and my Star Wars fandom journey, and like let me see the prequels as a kid in the theater and multiple times, and we'd play hooky from school so he could take me to see it, and then we'd just sit and have lunch afterwards and talk. Like, you don't need a Force ghost. Like, there's so many days that I think about him, or like where I do something that I know he would like, or watch a movie that I know we both enjoyed, and I'm just like, oh yeah, like it's how I spend time with him, or it's how I feel close to someone that I lost and I still have to continue growing up. And like that was Ben's struggle. So you get to Rise of Skywalker and he's like, Dad, I think I'm doing it. It's like, I have those moments too. And like, I'm not Force sensitive. I guarantee you I'm not Force sensitive. um, so it was just very humanizing in that sense. So yeah, like these movies grow with us. And like for me, even though by all accounts, right, I was the kid who got the action figures and stuff growing up. So like the prequel trilogy should absolutely be my jam, and I love it. But yeah, for me, just seeing the struggle of Ben Solo is where I grew into Star Wars and was like, okay, this is a character that I really see myself in and that I can really embrace in the fandom. Um, yeah, that and Rose Tico, like that's the other reason I love Last Jedi, because it gives us Rose. But when she tells Finn the story on Canto Bite, which again, like, not only am I a Last Jedi fan, but I love the Canto Bite sequence. It is one of my favorite sequences because, like, the crux of it is Rose sharing with Finn that, like, we watched the First Order destroy our home, and that is why we fight, and that is why we know that there are some things that need to change. Um, but they're not doing it because they hate the First Order. Like, the end of Last Jedi is Rose telling Finn, like, I'm not doing this because I hate them. Like, I'm doing it because I want someone else to, like, experience a better life and to grow in a place with love at its core and something beautiful, as opposed to, you have something we want, and unless you can prove that you're stronger than us, we will take it from you. Um, and so, yeah, I was like, I love those messages. And as an immigrant and as a kid who always felt like I was on the shoulders of giants and other people who had made such monumental decisions for me to even be where I'm at, I resonated a lot with that.
I love that. I think Rose has some of the best lines in the sequels. I mean, when she talks about, that I'll get it wrong because it's, not right in front of me for to read. But, when you fight because you're fighting for something you love, but not out of hate, basically. And I love that. And that is a huge inspiration for me for this, like, there can be so much hate in this fandom about something we supposedly love, right? Like, why are we focusing so much on those negative things? Like, why are we focusing on the entitlement that we can feel as fans? Because we do connect so deep to these characters and we do connect so deeply to these stories. Like, we want them to go the way that we want them to go. But, like, this is art and this is someone else creating something. And, like, we as fans, like, sadly, that's not for us to decide, and I think if everything went the way I wanted it to go in Star Wars, then that would leave out something being so special and meaningful for you or someone else that has a different story than I have. And I don't want other people to not be able to have the connection that I've been able to have with a character or a story, to not be able to have that just because it's a different story or it touches on different things or a different note or it doesn't go the way I want it to go. That, like, I don't own this.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we want more people to love it, like, it's got to be a little different, and I think sometimes people miss the point that Star Wars is for everybody, and, like, everybody's going to find something that they love about it. And why aren't we celebrating that part of it,
Yeah, absolutely. I tell my friends a lot of the time, especially now, it's like, the point of Disney owning the franchise is to essentially print money forever, right? Like, they gave George Lucas $4 billion for this. So, like, from a business standpoint, they
Yes.
need to make that money back and then some, or else it's not worth it. And it's like, the only way you're going to get to do that is if you are constantly innovating and changing and trying different things, because, what worked for one person, we're all mortals. So, like, you can love whatever part of Star Wars you want as much and want the stories to constantly run in that direction, but you will not be there to give Disney money 30 years from now. But that future Disney park pass holder that has Disney Plus, that, like, buys the toys and is there on premiere night, they're 5 right now. So they
Yeah.
need to get that 5-year-old
Right.
interested in what they have to offer. And, you know, generations, everyone's into something different because
Yeah.
everyone grows up differently and under different circumstances. So, there's that. And I also like to remind fans, like, fans were not that nice to George Lucas either. So we you know, we are spoiled in the sense that we got someone who made 6 films to begin with, and that it resonated so much that a company decided to come in and say, okay, we're going to carry this torch, and get to continue that journey. But yeah, it's everyone grows with it differently, and you have to be willing to grow with the franchise, which is one of the points of Star Wars anyways, right? Luke in A New Hope and Luke in Return of the Jedi are two different people. Like Rey and Ben literally have very conflicted feelings about everything going on by the time you get from the beginning to the end of the sequel trilogy. And then Anakin, becomes a robot by the end of the prequel trilogy. So like they all grow with Star Wars too. And that's the important thing. Like I love Mando, but I know I'm going to love it so much more when I become a father, like at some point in my life, and when that journey happens, because like it is also a story of fatherhood. And you get to season 3, and he is showing a lot of care and concern for Grogu. He's confirming that that's like an important part of his life, and turning his back on being a bounty hunter and like everything that comes with that. Like that's one of the rubs of the series, and it's like that's a fatherhood story. Like that's not about fleeing from one end of the galaxy to the other. He does it because he's a Mandalorian, but like he's trying to settle down. The end of season 3 is them hanging out on Navarro, like just kicking it. So it's, you have to grow with it. You have to change your perspective. You're not always going to be Luke. You're not going to be, young Leia forever. Like there will be different parts of your life, but there are different Star Wars movies that impact that and can show you like, here's how this character dealt with it when they became this age, and here's whether or not it's good or bad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely totally get that. I mean, like I never would have thought that like Leia wouldn't ever not be like my, I don't like having favorites. Like I've had people try to get me to do like rankings and stuff, and it's like literally the worst. Like it hurts my brain.
Yes.
And my rankings are always all over the place because I rank things on like sentimental value, not necessarily on like cinematic value, And so people are always like, that is the weird, Jessica, that's the weirdest ranking like I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, well, you asked me to do it. So don't be
Yep.
mad at me. But like for me, like as an adult to fall in love with Ahsoka as a character
Mm.
and to see myself in her so much, and like it was almost hard to like let it go that like almost that she was more important to me than Leia. Like if I had to
Mm.
pick, because Leia is like who I wanted to be, if that makes sense. Like I'm not super confident. Like I talked about that on like the first episode. Like I'm not a super confident person. I would love to be a super confident person. I would love to have like all the quippy like things to say like right back at somebody, like all the fast remarks. And that's just not how my brain works, And like I'm a helper and I am like an empathetic person, and that is who Ahsoka is,
Mm.
And so I think I get that. Like is all that I'm trying to say. Like I totally understand how like as we get older, sometimes the things that touches on us more change. And like when I first saw The Last Jedi, like I struggled with that movie a little bit. Not that I didn't like it, but like it was like little things, like filming style or different things like that that doesn't really matter. But I never honestly, and I have never said this on an audio recording, and I know people are going to come for me, but I never truly could see myself at all in Luke's character until The Last Jedi, because I know failure and I know depression
Yeah.
and I know being in that deep place. And he felt it then, and I feel like, that brought me to tears to see someone that is emulated as such a perfect hero be broken was so impactful for me as a person. And I understand that that is devastating to some people to see that, because they maybe have never been there. And, like, that's lucky, I guess. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like, if you've never been there, or either you're just not admitting it to yourself, or like, that's just fortunate of you to not be in that place. But I've been in that place. And, so I really felt his character and what he was going through in that moment, in that
yeah,
movie. And I think that people forget sometimes that I think that's the point, is that sometimes we can fail and we can get in these really deep, dark places. But I think people forget the end. People forget the point of that was that he still came back and he was still Luke Skywalker, and he still was inspiring to Broom Boy, right? Who we
mm-hmm,
see at the end, who is like the next generation. And like, he was still an inspiration for someone to have hope and to do the right thing. And I think people forget that that's kind of the point of what he went through. And he was still,
absolutely.
at the end, he was still Luke Skywalker.
Yeah. And if anything, like how that struggle makes him even stronger by the end of Last Jedi, right? Because he realizes that there is this cycle of violence, and as long as he keeps believing, the brochure of Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master, he is perpetuating it or doing things that will eventually allow this cycle of darkness and light to continue going. And like that's what he grapples with. That's what he shares with Rey of like, that's why I stepped away, because I realized that because the light was so strong in the galaxy, it was the light's turn to like corrupt and slowly, breed this path. Um, and he saw what he did with Ben and realized that like, okay, I need to do something different. And I'm just going to remove myself from the equation to let the light appear somewhere else. But once he realizes that that's not the right way, right? Just because life went wrong, that doesn't mean that, you completely take yourself out of it. Like, I think one of the things that really stuck with me on your first episode was that journey through depression and mental health. Like, I also live with depression, and, Luke's character was like, oh yeah, I messed up, so I'm just gonna completely remove myself from the galaxy. And in Star Wars, like you can go to the mystical island of Octo that no one's heard of and essentially do that. Um, but in the real world, like that is a very dark message, right? Like there's not too many ways to do that and still live. So like to see Luke grapple with that and come through the other side and say, I'm still not happy with the way the galaxy is, but I am going to choose to show a different way. Like he force projected himself halfway across the galaxy to fight but not fight, right? And he played on the insecurities of Kylo Ren by design, and then made everyone else see Luke because it knew that would play into the like, we're saved, our savior is here, and give them the courage to keep fighting. But he found a way to do it on his terms, and say, I've taken the lessons I've learned from the failure, that if I actually show up and like cut down the entire First Order, it's just going to perpetuate more violence. So I'm going to do it my way, and that will be the Jedi way. Um, that is, that's really impactful, and it really hit me in a way that, also just reminded me of like, okay, there are other things um, to do, and we have to grow and we have to progress. To me, it also makes the Luke and Mandalorian so much cooler because you can see the like the descent, right? Like when he shows up and saves Mando and Grogu from Moff Gideon's dark troopers, he's it's the inverse of the Vader scene in Rogue One. And like there's been YouTube videos that show that cinematography, but like it is the same thing. He cuts through a bunch of people in a hallway and then gets to the other side. And it's meant to both be that hurrah moment of like, oh, Luke Skywalker's here and he's like in his Return of the Jedi prime, but it is also a warning because now the Last Jedi Luke makes more sense, right? Where he's telling Rey of like, I really bought into the hype, and here I was like, I'm gonna save the day every day, And now you can see the scene in Mando. It's like, yeah, he believed the hype and he thought he could do no wrong. So there he was slashing everything. And it's like, oh, yeah, it's just droids, though. And it's like, that's how it starts, though. It's those
It's the
little.
poetry, right? The poetry of, Vader kind of the
Yeah,
dark side version of that.
yeah. And they're both right? It's the Skywalker boys, like in a hallway with a lightsaber. You better watch out.
They'll get you.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. Um, but yeah, I love that you have taken so much from these movies and that they have spoken so much to you, and that that you're willing to share that, because like I said, there is a lot of, in certain corners, there's a lot of hate towards that. And honestly, liking The Last Jedi is almost like more controversial than like any political anything right now,
Yeah.
like within our realm of things. So, but I hope that this can kind of show a different perspective to people, that they still might not like the movie, and it still might not be one of their favorites, but I hope this kind of can give them um, a little different of a perspective on those movies, like seeing it from someone else's point of view, from a certain point of view, it's a
Oh,
little
oh.
it's a little different.
Yeah.
Now you also really like Visions too, right? And there's
Yes.
a character in Visions that you also really love. Tell me
Yes.
tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so Visions is my tied for first kind of favorite thing, but specifically I love The Duel, which was the first short from season 1 of Visions. And it follows a character known only as the Ronin, who is a Sith warrior, and the short is him fighting another Sith. So like they have this whole fight and he ends up killing her and taking her Kyber crystal. And that, like, there was very little dialogue. It's like a 15-minute short, so I have no idea what it triggered in me, but like the cinematography of it, the style, the kind of no nonsense grumpiness of the Ronin, just really latched onto me. And after season 1, Disney announced they were going to make a tie-in book that would pick up where the short left off, and I was like, "Oh, I'm buying it." So I have it. I actually have it on audiobook, and I have the physical edition
Oh,
from
nice.
and it's from Goldsboro, so like it came from like a British bookstore. The cover's laminated. It's signed by the author. It's numbered. It's
Oh, I
like
love it.
super collector edition thing. And I read it once every year, but like it is a story where the universe is flipped on its head. It's not canon, so like whatever the authors say goes. And like the Jedi work with the Empire because the Empire is kind of viewed like a feudal Japan system. So they don't have like the Empire is their government. And the Sith became these people that broke away from the Jedi because the Jedi only followed the Lords, which meant they only really cared about the political reality and keeping that going. So the Sith in that Visions universe are like essentially freedom fighters, where they're like, we're force sensitive, but we don't want to be beholden to a lord, and some lords are nice and some are bad, but like that's not a great system to like uphold with our powers. So they strike out and go on their own. But by the time we get to the novel, it's the Sith are splintered, and we find out through the course of the book that he was the top Sith Lord, and he basically is trying to destroy the Order from within because he is not ready for the sacrifice of the amount of war and bloodshed it's going to take to get the entire galaxy to stop the current imperial system with the Jedi and the way that the world works. So that's like, it gave a lot more context to the short, where I was like, oh, he's hunting down other people that he brought into the Order because he doesn't want to perpetuate this war. So it's kind of a Last Jedi Luke, but from the other end, where he realizes he made a mistake and now he's just trying to dismantle it himself. But by the end of it, he encounters someone. I won't spoil all of it because I always recommend folks read this book, but he encounters someone that takes the opposite position of him and says, like, no, what you did was right, and we need to finish this, because if not, you're just damning people to a bad system because of your personal feelings of like the sacrifices it's going to take to get there. But like, there are still people that want this, and there are people who need this, so like we need to move forward with this. And he has to like reconcile that. So I love it. And it's also how I remind folks, like, you can love whatever corner of Star Wars you want, and it's all the same. Like I have a favorite canonical character, and like I love the Ronin so much. I have the audiobook, I have the physical book, I have the Star Wars Visions like art book in my library as well, and I have the book cover of Ronin actually tattooed on my right arm. And then on my left arm, I have Ben and Ray. So it's like, you can love whatever corner of Star Wars you want. And for folks that have like a lot of hand wringing with where the canon is, I always tell them, like, go watch Visions, because you can absolutely love it, and it's in there, and it got a season 2. So like Disney loves it. And just pick up other stories that you want.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like Legends is still there, for people that
Yeah.
want to read it or love it or, that sort of thing. It's not gone, you know?
Right. And for my Last Jedi doubters or cynics that are out there, there is one last suggestion I give folks. Um, Rian Johnson does this thing with any movie that he has directed, where for his cinematic score directors, he will cut the movie the way that he wants it cut, and he provides all of his composers what's known as a temp track, which basically Rian Johnson just puts other songs in his cuts of films to give the composers an idea of like what kind of theme or what kind of like music style he's hoping for once the composer gets to working. So he did that with John Williams, and he gave him a version of The Last Jedi that was like edited, had the VFX, everything, but no dialogue, and just like song after song after song, like a little playlist for him. And John Williams ended up getting inspired from it. So when he finished composing for The Last Jedi, he suggested to Rian Johnson to make a sound only version of Last Jedi. So it doesn't have any of like, it doesn't even have like the lightsaber sound or a blaster sound or like the boosters or anything. There's no dialogue. It is just the cinematography with the John Williams score. And he scored it in such a way that like there's maybe a handful of minutes that don't have any type of sound going on, but like John Williams actually composes through the entirety of Last Jedi. So yeah, I always tell folks, like, if you have seen Last Jedi with the dialogue and like it's not doing it for you, go on Disney Plus. They have the version as just the score only version, and just watch it that way, knowing that it's a story of good versus evil, with a John Williams score and just the cinematography of Last Jedi.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. That's a good. I mean, like, there's always something out there, like.
Yeah.
And if it's still not your thing, like, hey,
And that's fine.
there's
You
all
had
these
raw
other
broccoli
movies.
and you had, broccoli that we put in the oven and roasted. But if you don't like broccoli, then you don't like broccoli, and there's nothing I can do.
Exactly. So, like, what for people who really dislike this movie, what do you hope that they take away from it? Like, as someone who has personally been so like touched by The Last Jedi.
I think the biggest thing to take away from it is that it matters how you show up in the world, even if you are struggling with the reality of it. I think that's just the heart of The Last Jedi. Because Luke has to deal with it. He doesn't know how he wants to show up. Poe has to deal with it. He wants to show up as the hot shot, and then that ends up costing the Resistance even more lives than it has already cost them to fight this war. Leia has to figure out how to show up in a different way and guide people. And like, for her, the struggle is that at some point she's not even in control of the rebellion, right? Like Leia Organa, not in charge of the rebellion, is like frontline news. But yeah, just it matters how you show up and fight, and that things can get tough, but it's always important to push forward. Like Rose could have given up years ago. Finn could have given up years ago. Finn tries to give up. Again, why Canto Bight to me is like a great sequence, because he meets someone who is truly like, I do not care what happens in the world, right? Like DJ doesn't vote. DJ does not volunteer. DJ does not like, he doesn't work at any company for more than like 2 months, gets his like, Medicare, or like gets his health insurance through his employer, goes to his appointments, and then it's like, I'm off to find the next thing. And like the movie is telling us like that is wrong, right? Like he helps Finn and then he sells him out 10 minutes later to the First Order, and it's blatantly telling you like you can't show up in the world and not care who wins or who loses, because that is a life where you will constantly be by yourself, because DJ's by himself, Luke is by himself. So then if you must engage with the world, pay attention to how you engage with the world, because that's what's going to make the difference, right? Luke showing up inspires the rebellion. Finn deciding to put up that last stand, like it makes Rose step up. It makes these other things move and change and flourish and grow. So I think that's the important part.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is important. I think a lot of times, like, obviously, there's a lot adults can learn from all of that. But I think, too, I always try to remind myself, too, that, like, Star Wars was intended, like, for kids, right? And, like, I know for me, like, if I saw The Last Jedi as a kid and it's, like, the whole, Canto Bight part and, like, it's kind of explaining how, like, people play both sides, and like
Mhm.
how that is like a real world thing. I think that would have been very like influential in a good way for me as a kid to kind of have it those kind of types of concepts and um real world type situations like that explained through Star Wars. I think of me as a kid, like, going back to Padme and like her speech and like, well, this is how Liberty dies with thunderous applause, like that really stood out to me as a kid, and so um, I think a lot of times when things like that can be in Star Wars, like as adults, because we're kind of jaded or like, life happens and different things. Like we look at these things, we're like, oh my gosh, like, why is this in there or whatever? And like we forget that like there are, kids and teenagers and people that are watching this that like might not ever think about something in that way. And this is a great way to explain a situation.
Yeah.
Like art is always a great way to explain things from, even if it's a point of view that like is one that you don't agree with or doesn't resonate with you, like it still is a great way to show something from someone else's eyes and to kind of help you, I don't know, like see things from outside your own sphere or whatever,
Yeah.
And so with all of that, obviously the political themes in Star Wars, I'm sure, was like inspiring for you to start your podcast. What do you kind of hope to accomplish like through your podcast, like with using Star Wars and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So there's two kind of hopes. The first is, it sounds kind of hard to say on a Star Wars podcast, but like there's this like weird fight happening, and I don't even want to call it a fight in the fandom. It's just like this weird, I don't know, side effect or something that's happening in our general society, where like folks are having a hard time remembering Star Wars is political. And like it's trying to tell us lessons, but the next part of that sentence is like lessons specifically about how to engage with one another, how to like build a peaceful society, how to build something with love at its center as opposed to hatred. Like that's literally where the Sith and the Jedi get their powers from. And like it's trying to tell us a story with that as the backdrop. So just, the first is just to remind folks like Star Wars is political. It has a political bent. Like no one goes to war over their favorite color. They go to war over like real issues about their quality of life or lack thereof. But the second piece is to also remind people, like as fandom has evolved, especially in the era that we've grown up, because like we grew up when the internet was just a small little thing, and now it is like a corner piece of our like culture and society and everything else. But also to remind folks that like Star Wars is a story of people who never thought they could be in the thick of it suddenly getting to change the course of the galaxy. And I think with politics, it's very easy to get yourself in this mindset of I can't change anything. It's, the people in Washington are in charge of it, or some other person, or some random bureaucrat. But there are things that we can all do to help each other out. And in the course of doing that, we will create the ripples that will eventually change and make the world the way we want it to be. So by taking the Star Wars politics and the Star Wars stories, like fans know that story, right? Fans know that Luke is a farm boy who's going to become a Jedi, who's going to change the galaxy. And then we can then extrapolate that and put it in the real world where it's like, okay, here's a big policy issue, but here's who actually controls it. And oh, look, at the local level, here's the person that like you can search on the internet and find like who is your local school board member, who is your local state representative for the legislature in your state, who's a city council member.
Right.
And doing that, you become the next Luke, you become the next Ray, where it's like, okay, right now I'm just a person who lives in this zip code.
Right.
But now I'm going to go talk to this person and then go do and talk to this other person. And it will create those ripples. I even think of mutual aid, like when the pandemic came by and folks were literally just helping each other. If you go and watch Star Wars Rebels, there's a lot of instances of people just helping each other. And we get in our heads a lot thinking of like, oh, of course, that's how it works in Star Wars because they're the good guys and the good guys will always get what they need. But it's like, put yourself in their shoes. They went out on a limb to like not tell the Empire that Leia Organa's hanging out with them, or that ship actually has X-wings inside of it and that they're going to deliver that to someone else. Like that is a real risk that those people take. I always like to remind fans of like the rebels blew up the equivalent of Fort Knox. When you think of the Death Star, it's like they literally went in and like just destroyed a government installation.
Yeah.
So they went out on a limb, and it requires that courage, but we can do it. We can help each other out. Like aliens gave the rebels food. We can give someone food
Right.
and help them in that way. So yeah, it's just giving agency back to people. And I hope that by using Star Wars, something that people know intimately, it can give them that courage and that kind of mental framework to be like, okay, this is how I can do it in the real world.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think that's a huge undertaking and like definitely a very hard space to be in because again, there's so many opinions.
Yeah.
And so I know that has to be really hard to navigate and go through, but I think just like I feel like I need to be doing this, like we need people in different areas doing the different things that they're passionate about and that they feel like they can maybe make a difference in, So
Yeah.
you should tell people, if they want to check that out, if that's their thing, what your like is Sithty Minutes. Is that what it is? Right.
Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure I said it right. I'm always like so afraid of pronouncing something wrong. Like that's like my greatest fear.
I can totally empathize. Yeah, the podcast is called Sithty Minutes.
Sithty. Okay.
So
Yeah.
like 60 but with Sith. And we are pretty much everywhere podcasts can be found. I think maybe Amazon Music is the exception. But I will one day figure out how to get onto that corner of the internet as well. And you can follow us on Threads, which is also Sithty Minutes. And yeah, I think that's all the social media we have right now after the great exodus and breaking of social media of last year. I just don't have it in me to open up like 7 other accounts, so
Yes,
Threads is where I'll be.
it's a hard thing because you're like, okay, well then now do I have to have something different for each thing? And there's so much to it.
I almost thought
Okay.
about getting a TikTok, and now that TikTok might get banned in the United States, I'm like, well, that worked
Well,
out. Like, I'm
yeah,
glad
we'll
I didn't make
see.
that account.
Oh gosh, yeah. You never know what's gonna happen, honestly.
Yeah.
It's such a toss up, I feel like sometimes with things, but um do you have anything else that you want to add before I ask my I have a fun question that I want to ask?
Um no, I think that's oh, actually, just a shout out to the sequel trilogy lovers, like stand in your truth. Like I have very recently, because of all of the backlash of the sequel trilogy, um, I kind of unearthed a memory in my mind that I had just kind of sealed away. And I realized maybe a year or two ago, Jar Jar was my favorite prequel trilogy character. I love Jar Jar. Like, silly, goofy boy, heart in the right place, accidentally gave Palpatine exactly what he wanted. Like, bless his heart, like he was just trying his best, and like he got played, and it sucks, but like heart of gold, right? Like, of course the heart of gold person is gets played like a fiddle by the Sith, because like
Yes.
that's how they are, the Sith and the heart of gold person. um and I, as a kid, blocked that memory because of the backlash, not only of the prequel trilogy, but going back, it's like Jar Jar specifically got a lot of heat. And speaking of mental health, like Ahmed Best came out
Yes.
and had to document a lot of his journey because that role put so much pressure on him because of how it was received. And, you know, when I saw The Last Jedi and was like, this is going to be my movie and I'm going to love it, it unlocked that part in my mind of like, oh yeah, I shied away from something I loved a lot too because of backlash already, which just galvanized me when folks were like, oh, you like Last Jedi? Like, weird. I thought you were a Star Wars fan. I'm like, no, I am. And I just would double down on it in person with folks. And it's like, we don't have to talk about it if you don't like it, because I love it enough for me and for you. Um,
Yeah.
but like, I am a Star Wars fan, and that just happens to be my favorite movie. If you want to talk about something else, we absolutely can. um but yeah, stand firm in your truth, because you're gonna, I don't want other fans to experience that, where you're, literally 10, 15 years down the line in the same fandom, and you realize that you blocked an entire part of your life, and something that you loved, and buried it so far away that facing that again reminded you that you did it. Because I love Jar Jar. I used to
Yeah.
have a really great Jar Jar impression, and like walk around with kids in the playground, and like I loved it. I just loved being goofy little Jar Jar. That meant I was going to get to go to the pod races. Like, heck
I
yeah.
love Jar Jar too.
Yeah. And he was a Bombad general. Like,
Yeah, I
he
mean,
also fought and saved people in Naboo. Like, come on. What's not
yeah,
to love?
I don't understand like why we have to repeat the same thing. Like everyone's coming back on the love with the prequels, and it's like so many people were bullied as kids for liking Star Wars, and it was during the time of the prequels. And then now you're turning around and like doing the same thing to the like next generation. Like it's
Exactly.
okay to have critiques. It's okay for things to not be your favorite. It's okay to, even talk about that. But there's a difference, I think, between having a critique and saying something that isn't your favorite and then like literally telling someone that they're not a fan, or that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Like it's just sad to me that that's coming back around. So yeah, you should
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you like the sequels, like you should be proud that you like the sequels.
love it.
So my random question is, and it does kind of have to do with music. So I love that you had
Oh,
that Ryan Johnson question. All right. If you were making a playlist as Ben Solo and you were arriving to Exegol and Rise of Skywalker, what song is playing in your headphones as you're
oh,
going through that whole sequence that he goes through?
okay. So it's like he's going to Exegol, like during the Battle of Exegol version, or like
Yes.
the beginning of Rise of Skywalker.
So,
Okay.
like, when he gets there and he is Ben and he's gonna save Ray and all these things, like what is pumping in your earphones?
Ooh, okay. That's a really that's a great question. But I'm also very like, oh man, what would I do? I
No wrong
almost
answers.
yeah, I almost feel like it would have to be either like something like Rage Against the Machine, um, or like a Run the Jewels song. Because both of them are very like they're both artists that are kind of irreverent, or like groups that are kind of irreverent as far as like what the status quo is and what they want to do. So I would almost say, man,
Sorry, it's a hard question to kind of throw
no, you're
out unexpectedly.
no, you're totally fine. And like, and the other thing is like, I also used to do concert photography, so I've like experienced a lot of music and shows growing up. So I'm just like, man, there's so many like in that vein of just like, okay, we're doing this. Um, but I'm trying to find the Rage Against the Machine song that is in my head right now, but it's from their Battle for Los Angeles um album. I will
I had to throw out like, a hard question for
no, that's a good like and I just really want to like no, I'm
It's
just
so
like
hard
I
when
know
you
I can
have
get the
like
right
something
answer.
on the tip of your tongue and you're like, "Oh my gosh, what is that?" I do that all the time, and it's always the worst when it's something that's like Star Wars, like a name of a planet or different things, and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, someone's going to think like
Yeah.
I'm
Um
not a fan because I can't think of this."
I would say Calm Like a Bomb by Rage Against the Machine.
Good pick.
That's a
I love
yeah.
it.
Because I was like, because now he's like committed. He knows what he wants to do. He's like, we're just gonna go in there. He knows the. I mean, at that point, the Battle of Exegol is not going that great for the rebellion. So, Rey's kind of at her weakest. She's not sure what's going to happen next, and then here he comes, and he is for the first time in the entire trilogy, he has commitment on his face.
Yes.
Like Adam Driver's like, I am coming through. I am Ben Solo. Get out of my way. Um, the poor Knights of Ren, they did at most in the film was stand menacingly, and then when Ben Solo shows up and he's like, "You got to get out of my way," within like 5 minutes, he just completely dispatches the group of people that were his like right hand men the entire film. And it's just like, nope, out of my way. I got to go see my girlfriend.
Yeah.
And
I love it. That's awesome. I love it. All right, good pick. I'm glad that that question worked out because I kind of want to do that. So future guests, take note. I might ask you some random questions like that.
yeah, no, that was a great one. I loved it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to share your Star Wars story and, characters that have spoken to you throughout the years and kind of what is meaningful to you in Star Wars. So I know that can be a very personal and very kind of vulnerable place to be, especially in this fandom. So I really appreciate you doing that and taking the time and coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for creating the space as a Last Jedi lover. I really appreciated having the space to play and explore in the sequel trilogy
Of
and talk about all
course.
the other Star Wars that it changes because it exists and
Yeah.
it's out there. Um and yeah, your congratulations on your second step into a larger world. So,
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll see how it continues to go.
yeah, best of luck. Huge fan.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if, in the future I'm thinking of maybe doing some like specific things on different movies, and now I know a movie to like that you love. So it's perfect.
Yes, yes. Oh, also, I'm also available for any Andor stuff. So, like, if you
Oh
go down
yeah.
that path, oh, please, please.
Yes, that's I guess they just finished filming, right? So,
Yeah, I think it got pushed because of the writers and actors
right.
strike into
Yeah.
next year. But yeah, I think they're like almost done. So it'll come out sometime early or mid next year, I think was what they pushed it to, something like that.
Hey, having more Star Wars next year, I'll take it.
Yeah,
I love it. I love that we keep getting more things. So
yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to complain.
yeah. How lucky are we to get to put more Star Wars in future calendars?
Right, right. And then Ahsoka,
Hmm.
and all the things. So there's so much coming up.
Yeah, yeah. As the VHS kids, and then the ones that got just the prequel trilogy, and then because back when it was just George Lucas, he's like, okay, I'm done. I made episodes 1 through 6, and it's like we're the last fans that have an idea of like, no, you had your 6 movies and Tartakovsky Clone Wars, and maybe like 4 or 5 seasons of the animated shows, and like that was it. That was the Star Wars period. And now it's like I don't know what Star Wars is going to be in 20 years. What a wild thought to get
Right?
to have about our favorite franchise.
Yes. I think that's the way to look at it. It's positive. It's excitement. It's, who knows? And, we'll get things that we really like and we might get things that we don't. And that's okay. Like we already talked about, it's all right. And it's
Yeah.
just the excitement of getting to see what comes next, and the fact that even through the time that we didn't think we were going to get any more, we still loved it so much that we're still here as adults talking about it today. Like
Yeah.
that speaks a lot about the stories and and the themes and what Star Wars is about. So, well, thank you
Absolutely.
again so much for coming on, and maybe we'll have to have you come back on later or not later in the future.
Yeah. I'd love it. Thank you again so much for having me on and creating this space.
Of course, it's my honor to have people come on and share their stories. Truly, like I've been honestly like overwhelmed in the best way that like this resonates with people at all. So
Yeah.
it's it's been it's been good, and that's it for today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it all, and we will see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining us today on Tales of the Force. Our stories of hope is the force of this fandom, and they are a powerful ally to each and every one of us. Life creates them and makes them grow. Their energy surrounds us and binds us together. Don't forget, luminous beings we all are, not this crude matter. May the Force be with you always.